Okay. So in the last session we talked about profiles, and we we're discussing about how do we give access and permissions through profiles, and then we started talking about the permission sets, right? So today we are gonna see how do we create a permission set and how do we assign the permission set to the user, right? So just to give you an overview of a permission set, let's go back to the example that we were discussing yesterday. So sometimes as per this example, we see that there is a member from the sales team who needs some additional permissions which other people in the same profile do not require, right? So I just want some permissions to be given to one person from this profile. So obviously I cannot add those permissions to the profile, right? So for that reason we can create a permission set, which is again a collection of permissions, but this is basically the set of additional permissions that a user requires which are not there in his profile. All right, so any permission that a user requires which is not available in the profile and which is only required by one particular user or a couple of users but not by the entire profile, that's something which can be given through permission set. All right, so now let's go back and see how do we create a permission set. For permission set, we do not have any standard permission sets. All right, so you always have to create it. So let's go back to Salesforce. Give me one moment. Let me log in. Okay. So you can find permission sets under Manage Users. Just above the profiles, there is this option called permission sets. All right. You click on this. Okay. As I said, there are no standard permission sets, so you won't see any permission set here. You can create your own permission sets. Click on New and create the permission set. And give the name of the permission set. Okay, so we have given a name to the permission set and click on save. All right, so your permission set gets created here. This is a custom one. There is no standard permission set. Now once this is done, all that we have to do is assign put the permissions into the permission set. All right, so if you see, all the permissions are listed here. So whatever permission you want to put, the permission that we wanted to give was for cases, right? Read write access on cases, which is going to be object settings, right? The same way if you want to give apps permission, or if you want to give some other permission, you can do that. We want to give objects permission, so click on object settings. Okay, which object are we talking about? Cases. Click on cases. Okay, now in cases we have got the tab setting and object permissions. Basically you have the option of defining whether you want to make the cases tab available to this permission set and what level of permissions you want to give on the cases object. All right, So I'll say make the tab available and give a read, create, delete access on permission set. All right. So now this permission set 1, this holds permission to view the tab and to read, create, edit, delete the cases. Got it? Now if I assign this permission set to a user who does not have access to cases, he'll get the access to cases through this permission set. All right. So that is okay. That's it. Fine. So this is done. Now all that we need to do is we just need to go and assign the permission set to the user. How do we do that? We can just go to the user who requires the permission set and we'll click on the user. You need to scroll down a little and you will find the option to assign permission sets, permission set assignments. Okay, so you have to go to the user who requires the permission set and then you will see permission set assignment option here. Click on edit assignments. Okay, so all the permission sets that you create will be listed here, and the ones that you want to allow for this user, you have to just move those to this side. Okay, you can actually give multiple permission sets to the user also. Let's say there is a permission set created for cases, there is another permission set created for campaigns. Sorry. So if there is one more created for campaign, and if you want to give both the permission sets to this user, you can actually select both of them and move it to the right side and then click on save. Now this user will have permissions through his profile, which is system administrator, and he will also have permissions through the permission sets which are enabled to him. Right, after a month you can actually go back and remove the permission set from this user. Okay, so that is the thing. That's how a permission set works. All right, so usually this access and permissions to metadata components are controlled using profiles. Okay, but whenever we have a requirement, whenever we have an exception in the profile, there are multiple users and some user require some permission, others should not get those permissions. In that case, we cannot make changes on the profile. In that case, we need permission sets. All right. Okay. Now coming to the next thing, which is data sharing. Okay. So I think I asked you a question in the last session, that if you have let's say some 20,000 account records, and if you have multiple sales people, would you expose all those 20,000 records to everyone, or would you just give them access to the records that they are working on? And most of you said that you will just give the access to the records that they need to work on. All right, and it's important from two perspectives. One is definitely the better data management, so that you do not have too many confusion. Secondly, the security of the data is also important, right? So unnecessarily people viewing the data which they don't even need to view, that actually that actually gives a scope of data security issue also. The second thing is managing the data, or for the end user also, if he gets to see all the accounts or all the records from a table, things become difficult for the end user as well, not just for the system administrator. Let's say if I just get to see my leads, then it becomes easier for me to manage those leads. But if I see everyone's leads in my UI, then it becomes a little difficult for me to figure out which are my leads and how to work on them. All right. So that is the thing. So now we are going to talk about this part with data sharing. Why I'm calling data sharing here? Why this concept is called data sharing? Because in data, every record has an owner, right? When we talk about records, now we are talking at a record level. Now we are not talking at tab, object, or field level. Now we are talking at a record level, right? So what are we talking now? We are talking about controlling access at a record level, right? Now, for at a record level, every record has got an owner, right? We have a record owner. Now, record owner will definitely have access to the record. Obviously, he has to have the access to the record. All that we have to define is whether others will have access or not. Fine. So at a data access level, it's not about who will have access to which all records and all. Record owner will have access. All that you need to define is whether others should have access or not. Got it? So for that reason, it's basically about whether the data is to be shared with everyone or data should be kept private to the record owner. Okay. So for data, there is a slightly different concept. See, there can be millions of records, right? So for records, it is not possible to define individually that, okay, this person should have access to this record, this person should not have access to this record. That becomes very difficult, right? So here the concept is pretty simple. The access and control is basically controlled by the record owners. Okay, so record owner will have access to the record. That's that's something which will always be true, but others will have access or not, that's something which we can define. All right, so that's the reason why we are calling it data sharing. So whether the data is shared with others or not, that's what needs to be defined. So for data sharing, you have to first of all make the data as public or private. So you have to define whether your data is public or private. What does public mean? Public data means everyone has access to that data. Private data means only record owner has access to that data. Fine, pretty simple concept. Private means only record owner can see the record. Public means everyone can see the record. Okay. So the first thing that we need to define for data sharing is whether your data is public or private. If it is public, everyone will see it. If it is private, only the record owner will see it. All right. So where do we define this? You need to go to setup. Under setup, you need to go to security controls. Under security controls, you have to click on sharing settings. Okay. So this option is called sharing settings. Under sharing settings, we have got two options. Okay. The first one is org wide default, also called OWD. Okay. Sharing settings is, again, as I said, you are just defining the mechanism for sharing the data. Okay. In sharing settings, you have an option called OWD, org wide default. Okay. Basically, why are we calling this org wide default is, I told you, see, you have two options, right? You can define that you can make the data public or private, correct? So when you make the data public or private, you have to make the data of an object completely public or completely private. So it's like this. If you see, let's say there's an object, account object. Okay, this is your account object. And this is contacts. And this is opportunities. Okay, so this way I have got a lot of objects. When you start defining whether the data is public or private, you have to define the data for account is public or private. Okay, let's say I want to keep accounts public. Okay, If I say accounts are public, all the accounts will be public. And if I say accounts are private, then all the accounts will be private. So you do not have an option of defining only a few records as public and the other records as private. No, it doesn't work that way. All right. Either you define that complete object as public or you define it as private. Okay. So whatever public or private is going to be applicable on all the records of that object. The same way contacts, you can define either contacts are public or private. If it's public throughout organization. If it is private, it's private throughout all. Got it? So that is the concept. That's the reason why we call it org wide default. So this is basically, this public or private is the sharing setting for entire organization. Okay. You cannot say that okay, only this person's data is going to be public, other people data is going to be private. No. You have to define it at an organization level. Okay, so that's why it's called org wide default. So first of all, you need to define the default setting for the organization. At an organization level, your data for an object is public or private. That needs to be defined. How do we do that? We go ahead and define that here. Okay, so if you see, all your objects are listed here. Your org wide defaults, all the objects are listed here, and you can click on edit and define the OWD settings. So accounts and contracts, you want to make it private, you can do that. Opportunities, you want to make it private. By default, most of them are public. Okay, but if you want to make them private, you can do that. Okay, right now opportunity is public, which means everyone can see all the opportunities. Okay, but if you want to make it private, you can just go and make it private here. If you save this, only the opportunity owner will get to see the opportunity, others will not get to see. Okay, so that is the thing, and it's going to be applicable on all the opportunities across organization. That's the reason why it's called org wide sharing default. Okay, now fine. The point is that because we are applying this OWD at an organization level, so what I'm doing, I'm actually defining all the records of an object either as public or private. So OWD basically is the default setting that you set up for the entire organization. So that needs to be done at an organization level. All right. So for everyone in the organization, it's going to be the same setting. Okay. Now, because it's at an organization level, there will be requirement for exceptions. There will be certain exceptions, right? So let's say you have defined opportunities as private. Think about it, which means throughout organization, all the opportunities are private. Only opportunity owners get to see the opportunity. But there will be times when you require someone to see the opportunity of the other person. There can be reasons for that. Let's say we all are part of a sales team, and we all work on our opportunities. Opportunities are private, which means each one of us gets to see our own opportunities. We don't get to see other person's opportunities. All right. Now, for some reason, let's say I am not going to be in office for 1 month. Okay, because I'll not be there in office. The company wants someone else to look into my opportunities, but opportunities are private. Let's say Bhaskar will look into my opportunities, but my opportunities are private, so he cannot see my opportunities. In case he wants to see my opportunities, he'll need permission to see those opportunities, right? Now this is an exception, right? So this way there can be exceptions when the data is made private. There will not be too many exceptions when the data is public. If it's public, everyone can anyhow see the data. But if the data is made private, then there will be exceptions. There will be certain people who will need to see the data. Okay, so some exceptions are there. So first of all, we'll define the data as public or private, and then we can control those exception requirements through some other options. Okay, now let's talk about what all exceptions we will have. Exception comes into picture only if the data is private. If the data is public, then there is no point of exception. So if the data has been made private, which means only the opportunity owner starts viewing that particular opportunity, then there will be a few exceptions there, right? So there can be three possibilities. Okay, possibility number one is a manager wants to view private data. Manager means if I'm the opportunity owner and my manager wants to see my opportunities. Possibility, right? You have made opportunities private. Only the opportunity owner can see the opportunity, right? Now, if there is the manager of the opportunity owner who wants to see what actually the guy is doing or what is the sales team member doing on that opportunity, he needs to access. But because he's not the owner, my manager is not the owner of the opportunity, he doesn't get to see it, right? So this is one requirement. Okay, that manager who is actually not an owner of the opportunity, but he wants to see it because he has to uh, see how I'm working on that particular opportunity. Okay, so this is the first requirement. To deal with this requirement, there's an option already available here: grant access using hierarchies. Okay, so here if there is a person, there's another user who is uh, my manager as per the hierarchy defined, that person will have access to my records also. Okay, so if there is a hierarchy defined, let's say there is this guy, under this guy there are two sales people. Okay, let's say there's a sales manager and there are two sales people. Okay, and if you have set grant access using hierarchies, then this sales manager will have access to the records of these two people. Okay, even if the data is private, because he is the manager. Okay, under him if there are two more people, this person will have access to data of these two, because as per the hierarchy he is sitting at top of him. All right, so that is the thing. So grant access using hierarchy, if selected, then the managers will have access to the data of their subordinate even if the data is private. If it is public, then there is no question of this, because if it is public, everyone gets to see everyone's data. So, we don't even need to think about this. But if it is private also and grant access using hierarchies is selected, then the managers will have access to the data of the subordinate. That's one thing. Now, the other small thing that I would want you to understand, where do we define this hierarchy? You must be thinking, where do I define the hierarchy? So defining hierarchy is done from roles. So under manage users, there's an option called roles. Okay. Yeah, under manage users, you can go and you can set up your roles. Setting up roles means setting up the hierarchy of your company. Okay. By default, if you see, uh, there's this kind of a hierarchy structure already defined: CEO, CFO, CO. This defined, right? This is a dummy hierarchy that they have set up. You can just delete the ones that you do not need. Let's say you do not have a CFO. Delete this. Click on delete. It will get deleted, and you can add your own roles. Okay, so you can set up your organization's hierarchy here, and then assign the roles to the users. All right, so that means what will happen, the CEO will have access to the records of CFO and all these people. Correct. And SVP customer service and support will have access to records of these people. Got it? So that's how it is done. Okay, so grant access hierarchies comes into picture only if the data has been made private. If the data is public, then it's not required, because then everyone has access. You don't even have need to be a manager or someone to get the access. All right. Now there is an interesting thing that you would notice here, that this grant access using hierarchies is by default selected and you don't even have an option to turn it off. Do you see this? It's selected and I don't even have an option to turn it off. Okay, it's not editable. But after a few objects, here it's available. I mean, I can edit it here. Can you figure out what is the difference between these objects and these objects? Why is it available here? Why is the edit option is available here and not here? What is the difference? Can you figure out the difference? Okay, yep. So these are all standard objects and these are custom objects, right? So what do we understand? So what do we actually understand out of this? That this grant access using hierarchies is available for, you can change this option for custom objects, but for standard objects it's by default on and you cannot turn it off. That's what we can understand from here, right? So by default it's on and you cannot turn it off, which means if your data is in any of the standard objects and if you have the role hierarchy defined, your manager will always have access to your data. You cannot restrict access to your data from your manager. Your manager will always get to see the data of the subordinate. So if the role hierarchy is defined, so there are two things which are required. If the data has been made private and if the role hierarchy is defined, manager will always have access to the data. So you cannot make the data completely private, only visible to the record owner. Okay. If role hierarchy is defined, people on top of the hierarchy, they will always see the records of the subordinates. Correct? If you have to, so if you have the role hierarchy defined and if you have to store some data in such a way that it is only visible to the record owner, not even to the manager, that sort of data should be stored in a custom object, because standard object will not allow you to do that. All right. Okay. So this is one requirement, very generic kind of a requirement. As I said, exceptions is what we are talking about. So the first exception is the manager wants to view the data, which is obviously the private data. Then we have this option of grant access using hierarchies. Second requirement can be someone who is not even a manager, okay, but needs access to the data. Let me call it a non-manager. Okay, non-manager means anyone. It can be my subordinate, it can be the other person at the same level. There is a scenario that I do not even have the role hierarchy defined in my company, but there is another person who requires access to my data. Managers can get data through grant access using hierarchies, but for non-managers we have to define sharing rules. So this can be achieved using grant access using hierarchies. For non-managers, we have an option called sharing rules. Again, this scenario comes into picture. This scenario comes into picture if the data has been made private. So there is a person who needs to access my data, but that person is not my manager. Okay. In this case, you have to define a sharing rule. What is a sharing rule? Sharing rule is a temporary exception to the this thing, OWD. All right. So sharing rule is used for defining exceptions to the OWD. So for sharing rules, again you need to go to the same screen. You can go to setup security control sharing settings. So in sharing settings, the first option is OWD, and the next option is sharing rules. You see this? Sharing rules is used for defining exceptions to OWD, and sharing rules are required only if you have made the data private in OWD. If OWD is kept public, then there is no requirement of sharing rules, right? So let's say I've made opportunities private, all right? Now there is one more person who wants to access, let's say I will be on leave and Bhaskaran will need to look into my records, okay? So there what we need to do, we need to define a sharing rule, and this sharing rule can be defined for opportunity because we are talking about opportunity here. So whichever records, whichever object records you want to share, you can select that and define a new sharing rule there. So for opportunity sharing rule, I can just go ahead and click on new here, and this is where you have to define the sharing rules. Just give it a name. Okay, now select your rule type. You want to share records, with non-owners. What is the criteria for you to select the records? Based on record owner or based on some other criteria? So basically you are selecting which records need to be shared. So you can actually select based on any other criteria, or you can select based on the record owner, that share the records of this particular owner, or you want to share the records on some other criteria. Let's say I want to share all the records which have let's say probability greater than 60 or 50. Okay, so all the records where this probability is greater than 50, I want to share all those records. This can be there, or you can share the records based on record owner, that share all the records of one particular record owner. Okay, so let's say I want to share all the records of VP International Sales with, okay, now who do you want to share it with? I want to share it with VP Marketing. Okay, and what level of access you want to give? Do you want to give a read only access, or you want to give a read write access? That can be defined here. So let's give a read write access and click on save. That's it. So that's what we will have. Got it. Now VP Marketing will have access to the data of VP International Sales even if he is not the owner of these records, and if he is not the manager of this person, but he'll still have access. Why? Because we are providing, we have defining this sharing rules, which is a temporary exception to the OWD. If you read it here, use sharing rules to make automatic exceptions to your OWD sharing settings for defined set of users. Got it? So at any point of time you want to define an exception to your OWD, you can do that using sharing rules. Right? And if you read this last line, you can use sharing rules only to grant wider access to data, not to restrict access. Which means the sharing rules can only be used for giving access. You cannot restrict someone's access using the sharing rules. Okay, so if there is a user who does not have access to my records, he needs access, I can give that using sharing rules. A user who already has some access and I want to restrict that using sharing rule, it doesn't work that way. Alright, it's only used for giving access. So basically it only works when the data is private and someone requires access. Okay. So that's the second exception. Now we'll talk about the third type of exception. So you have seen two scenarios. Both of them come into picture if the data is private. First is a manager requires access because of the hierarchy. We can control it using grant access using hierarchies. A non-manager requires access due to any reason, XYZ reason. Okay. There you can define sharing rules. Third option is there will be certain users who need access, like who need access to everyone's data. Some users will be there like system administrator, right? A system administrator requires access to everyone's data, right? Even if the data is made private, this is also going to come into picture if the data is private. Let's say you have made the data private, which means only the opportunity owner gets to see the data, correct? But system administrator still needs to view everyone's data because he is the one who is actually managing most of the data. Or if there is a person who is creating reports, think about it. Let's say there is a person who is responsible for creating reports. There are 10 people in the sales team and they get to see their own individual opportunities. I've hired one more person whose job is to generate reports. Okay. Now this person who is actually generating report, he should have access to everyone's data, then only he can actually do a report, right, on everyone's data. Otherwise, how will he do that? The same way, if there is a person who is actually responsible for data management, who is actually updating records and inserting records and all that stuff. Okay, let's say there is one person who is doing all these things, the bulk data operations. Now this person also needs to have access to everyone's records, otherwise how will he actually do it, right? Definitely this person who is doing the reporting or the person who is doing the data management, they are not going to be the record owners. Okay, there's the sales team and the sales team members are going to be the record owners, but they need access to everyone's data, right? Or a system administrator requires access to everyone's data. Got it? Now these kind of people need permissions. So here I'll call it admin level permissions. So some users require this admin level permission where they need to see everyone's data because of the job requirement. Okay. So for them we have to give the access to all the records. Even if the data is private, they need access to all the records. Defining through sharing rules is always going to be difficult because they need access to everyone's data. Now, for sharing rule, you will have to go and define it, for every object and all. It's going to become difficult. So for these kind of users who need admin level permissions, we'll need to give the permission from their profile. I do not know if you guys remember, while we were talking about object permissions on profile, we had something called view all and modify all permission. Do you remember that? There was something called a view all and modify all permission, right? That's what we are going to use now. So anyone who requires access to everyone's data, we need to go and give a view all or modify all permission on their profile. So let me go back to the profile. Let's talk about this. So let's go back to the profiles. We'll go to the profile that we created. This is the one that we created. Let me just go back to this profile. Click on edit here. Okay. Now you see the view all and modify all permission. So what does the view all permission do? A view all permission on account actually gives the permission to see all the account records, even if they are private. Okay, so anyone who has got a view all permission here will get to see all the account records, no matter whether account OWD is private or public. Okay, so these if you see these are data admin level permissions. So this permission allows you to view everyone's records. If it is public, then everyone will get to see it. But if it is private, then uh, then also you will get to see the records. Correct? So if you read this, see. If you want users with this profile to have view access to all records of the selected object type, regardless of the sharing settings for the object. So regardless of what is the sharing setting, if it is whether it's private or public anyhow everyone will get to see it. But even if it is private, uh, the users who have got this view all permission on their profile will get to see everyone's data. Okay, so for these kind of users, as I said, you know, the reporting people, or for the system administrator or the data administrators, or the people who are actually working on the data management side, you feel that these people need access to everyone's records, just allow them, give them a view all permission on that particular object. Yep. So that's how it is. A modify all permission is the same thing. View all gives a read access, modify all gives edit delete access also on all the records. Correct. So let's say there's a person who is doing reporting. You just want that person to see the data. He should not be able to change. You don't give him a modify all access. Just give him a view all access so that he can see the records and he can generate reports. Okay. But there is another person who is actually working on data management. He needs to make changes to the records as well. Then you need to give him modify all access. Okay. So admin level permissions, people who are like, people who need access to everyone's data, irrespective of the sharing settings or irrespective of the OWD settings, for them you have to give a view all or modify all permission on the profile. Okay. Now tell me one thing, if there is a profile and there is only one user who requires view all and modify all permission. Let's say, there are 10 sales people. Okay. 10 people in the sales team, and all 10 of them have the same profile. One person here requires to see everyone's data. Everyone has an entire organization's data. How are you going to do that? One person requires view all and modify all permission. How are we going to do that? Out of 10, there is one person. So, there can be a possibility that there is one person who will do reporting. He is also part of the sales team. So, he also has got the same sales profile. What will you do? So if you give the view all permission on his profile, let's say that one person is me. Let's say I'm that person. If you give the view all permission on my profile, then everyone else will also get the same permission, right? What do we need to do? We just need to go ahead and put it in a permission set. Absolutely correct. Correct. So that is the thing. So if you're wondering that can we always go and give a permission through the profile, there can be other people who are using the same profile, right? Then give it through permission set. Okay, this can be given through permission set as well, right? Okay, so that's how basically we control the access to the data. So for the metadata components like apps, tabs, objects, fields, you can control it through profiles. Any exceptions required on the profile are controlled through permission sets. Then comes the data access. For the data access, the basic level of access which need to be given, the first thing that you have to do is you have to define the data is public or private. If the data is public, you just have kept the data public and you don't have to do anything. If you have made the data private, then there can be scenarios where you need to share data with people who are not the owners. So when you need to Share the data with non-owners. There can be these three scenarios. All right. The managers, give them access using grant access using hierarchies. Non-managers, do the sharing rules. Admin level users, give them access through view all and modify all. That's it. Right. Okay. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Now let me